If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address.
You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry and you won't have a single gun death. That is nonsense. It's drivel. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year, so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal.
Lightning almost never strikes twice, except this time it did. Charlie Kirk was doing one of his usual college appearances where he was decrying all of the black gang violence because that's the biggest threat to America, don't you know? And then he was shot by someone with a rifle who was on top of a building. The exact same thing happened to Donald Trump last year. Shot by a sniper from a rooftop. The difference being Trump only had an ear grazed. Charlie Kirk, on the other hand, was struck in the neck and died. And it was obvious that this incident was going to be politicized as hell because the news was delivered to the country not through the usual white media organizations, but by the Orange Man himself in a special public address from the Oval Office. Something he has never done about any of the mass shootings, even at schools or anywhere else. But he did it in this case. And of course, the GOP was eager to try to see if they could exploit this one for all the political mileage they thought that it could get. Charlie Kirk celebrated the attempted murder of Paul Pelosi, who was beaten with a claw hammer in his own home. Kirk smiled and laughed as he talked about it. He had an ear-to-ear grin on his face. He even went on the internet and asked his viewers to bail the attempted murderer out.
By the way, if some amazing patriot out there in San Francisco or the Bay Area wants to really be a midterm hero, someone should go and bail this guy out. I bet his bail's like $30,000 or $40,000. Bail him out. And then go ask him some question.
And then predictably, he went on to the white right's typical go-to talking point about Chicago, talking about cashless bail, etc.
I wonder what his bail is. They're going after him with attempted murder, political assassination, all this sort of stuff. I'm not qualifying it. I think it's awful. It's not right. But why is it that in Chicago, you're able to commit murder and be out the next day? Why is it that you're able to trespass, second-degree murder, arson, threat of public official, cashless bail? This happens all over San Francisco, but if you go after the Pelosi's, oh, you're let out immediately.
How is it that someone charged with murder is let out on bail? Gee, I don't know. How is it that George Zimmerman murders Trayvon Martin but is given bail? How is it that Kyle Rittenhouse kills 2 people and gets bail? Daniel Penny strangles an innocent man to death in broad daylight and gets bail? How many cops have murdered black people in cold blood and been given bail? But of course, neither Charlie Kirk nor any other right-wing blowhard ever mentions that. Suddenly, they have no problem with cash bail when the killer has killed a black person or those demonstrating on black people's behalf. So Charlie Kirk doesn't have a problem with people being charged with murder and getting bail. He just has a problem if he doesn't approve of their victim. Prior to Charlie Kirk being killed, the big issue that the white right was running with was that there was a Ukrainian woman who had been killed, allegedly by a black man, and of course Donald Trump making hay about it because I guess that all of his National Guard movements throughout the country haven't been enough to get people to shut up about the Epstein thing, so as far as he's concerned, he's just going to bring up black people every chance he gets. You don't give the Orange Man any points for originality. But as for Charlie Kirk, he played right along with that exact same narrative. Charlie Kirk was a raving hypocrite. That's the problem that people had with him aside from his out-of-control racism. The split instance that the news of Charlie Kirk being shot had hit the airwaves, you had the white right, led by the odious individuals in the GOP, immediately screaming, we need to have all of this sympathy and empathy, but understand, Charlie Kirk himself said that empathy was a bad thing.
Bill Clinton in the 1990s, it was all about empathy and sympathy. I can't stand the word empathy, actually. I think empathy is a made-up New Age term that does a lot of damage, but it is very effective when it comes to politics. Sympathy I prefer more than empathy. That's a separate topic for a different time.
So clearly, no matter what, he wouldn't have wanted empathy. He certainly denied empathy to enough people. And as far as sympathy goes, keep in mind, sympathy is usually one step removed from contempt. He never discussed white-on-white crime. That was something that Charlie Kirk and the rest of those zealots over at Talking Points USA, that's what I'm calling it because that's what it is, they never talked about white-on-white crime. None of the right-wing nuts ever does. Ben Shapiro, was himself a target of a white person who threatened him with bodily harm live on air. Not a word about white-on-white anything. 80+% of white people who are killed in the U.S. are killed by another white person, but the copy and paste stat trolls never mention that fact, and neither did Charlie Kirk.
White individuals are actually more likely to be attacked, especially even per capita, by black individuals in this country. And in fact, if you want to actually talk about race-focused activity, why is it that you then ignore all the race-focused activity of black on white crime? Will, I want to live in a race-neutral country. I don't like talking about race all the time. But when I see it, and I see the left ignore it, and we try to make them live up to their own standard of rules that they force-fed us during the chaos of 2020, it really goes to show the destruction that this can lead to the entire nation.
Fixating on phony stats about black crime may help take attention off the real problems that white society has going on, but it's not making them any safer. In fact, we saw that on the very day that Charlie Kirk was killed, there was also another school shooting that had taken place in Colorado. You see, all of the scapegoating of black people and all of the distractions and deflecting onto black people, it's making white society less safe. But the white right doesn't care about that. And neither does the white media. From the schools to movie theaters to their political rallies to their public appearances. It's a shooting gallery. And it ain't Pookie and Ray Ray who's doing it. Gabby Giffords, Donald Trump, Melissa Hortman, and now this. Charlie Kirk's very last post on Twitter was a demand that the death of Irina Zarutska must be politicized. As he himself put it, it's 100% necessary to politicize it. That's what he said about the murder of a white woman who allegedly was killed by a black man. Only thing on his mind is it's 100% necessary to politicize it. It was about getting political mileage out of it. It wasn't about a person whose life was ended. He didn't care about justice. He cared about trying to get back at the so-called left for the uprisings of 2020. This is also the same putrid sentiment that Ben Shapiro expressed when he was agitating for the murderer Derek Chauvin to be given a pardon for his federal conviction. Shapiro didn't say a word about Chauvin being innocent. He didn't produce any evidence that he was innocent, same way he continued to repeat the lie that George Floyd died from a drug overdose, even after the medical examiner's report proved that he hadn't. Shapiro kept lying because this isn't about the law or justice. It's about white power not being challenged. You see, the big issue that the white right had, the reason that Shapiro was wigging out and the rest of these white right people all this week have been crashing out about Charlie Kirk being killed, is because white supremacy doesn't like taking any L's. That's the reason why they started threatening all of these HBCUs. Black people didn't have anything to do with it as far as they're concerned. Charlie Kirk being killed, especially that he was killed by a white man, that proves that he was wrong. That was the ultimate slap in the face to all of his anti-black talking points. He was their own personal avatar, and their avatar was killed by the very thing that he didn't talk about. It basically verified everything that black people had said. They don't care that he was killed any more than he cared that that Ukrainian woman was killed. It's all about political power. People being murdered, that's nothing more than points on the board. That Zarutska woman was a refugee from Ukraine. She wasn't even here in 2020. Her death had nothing to do with the 2020 uprisings, but it shows that for the white right, they took an unprecedented L that year. They were traumatized by it and still are. They saw people standing up to the thugs in blue. And that's the only way that the white right or just the dominant society in general can get their way. They have to use armed thugs in order to do it. That's what the police represent to them. The Charlie Kirks and the Ben Shapiros and others saw that the people could crush the enforcement arm of white supremacy in a single day if they chose to, and they saw an example of the people choosing to. The white right wingnuts have repeatedly said that the proverbial clock needs to be turned back in time. In fact, that sentiment was very popular with Charlie Kirk himself. He told Donald Trump that, well, Trump, if you want to get back to the 50s, the first thing the country will have to do is to undo the 60s. And he made it clear what he meant. It's perversely predictable that you got these people on the white right trying to compare Charlie Kirk to Dr. King. I mean, that's the last brain cell in a demented mind that tries to come up with that one. First of all, the white right hates Dr. King. They try to find a way to take his words and to twist it and say Dr. King wouldn't have stood for affirmative action when he was the very freaking architect of it. Charlie Kirk himself, though, being part of this new young generation of white right supremacists, he decided that he, for one, had enough of the white right conservatives pretending that they liked Dr. King. He wanted to go ahead and put that pretense aside. It was time to go ahead and say what they really thought. After all, it was Republicans who were leading the charge to vote against a holiday for Dr. King. So all of their pretend respect for him, it was nothing but a lie. It was them putting on political theater, even though nobody was fools. So Charlie Kirk was like, hey, let's just go ahead and stop pretending. Let's just say what we always thought about him.
Some tech blog called Wired Magazine?
You'd think they would write about
crypto?
Computers, the internet,
Bitcoin, crypto, hacking,
engineering, but apparently
cybersecurity.
they just police what people think about a certain infamous American of the mid-20th century.
Yeah, some holy figure. We note in our piece that Kirk describes King as, quote, a bad guy. It's true. And Kirk's self-described very, very radical view that the country made a mistake when it passed the Civil Rights Act. Also true. As we note in the piece, Kirk has previously described Kirk as a hero and a civil rights icon. It's true. I used to be wrong. What inspired Kirk to shift his view on MLK? Why does Kirk think that MLK is a bad guy? When Kirk says that MLK says, quote, one good thing he didn't believe, what does he mean by that? Why does Kirk believe passing the Civil Rights Act was a mistake? Now, again, apparently they don't listen to the show because we do that at least once a week, right? Once a week we talk about why the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. How did we get here, and how much of our race-obsessed politics is because of the elevating of MLK?
The right needs to stop mythologizing this guy and really needs to stop taking this one line in one speech about, having a dream and children. And obviously, it sounds great, but you have to actually look at his record and the things that he did and the things that he supported and the people that he supported, the policies that he supported, the mass race riots that were going on all throughout the 1960s that he didn't seem to bat a single eye at that were going on.
Why is it that the person that gets their own federal holiday is the person we've never actually criticized?
And so he said it. He said Dr. King was a bad guy, and that Dr. King only said one good thing that he didn't actually believe. And then he said, well, we've got to criticize Dr. King. How come we can't criticize Dr. King? Dr. King was criticized his entire life. He was criticized, demonized, lied about, and murdered. What Charlie Kirk and his ilk are really butthurt about is that they don't have any heroes or icons of the stature of Dr. King. That's what they're angry about. Whenever you talk about the heroes of the Charlie Kirks, you see slave owners and rapists and killers and mass murderers. Those are the heroes of the white right. They don't have anybody like Dr. King. And whenever people remind them of who and what Dr. King was, they see how puny and insignificant their own heroes are. That's what it's really about. It's a matter of we don't have anybody like Dr. King, so we got to destroy Dr. King. So for the morons and idiots who are trying to make false comparisons between Charlie Kirk and Martin Luther King, they can save it. Charlie Kirk himself didn't like Dr. King, and that's why we bring the receipts, so you're not going to get away with that one. Dr. King fought for a society where color was no longer going to be the determinant of how far someone could go in life. Charlie Kirk, on the other hand, he wanted color to be the sole determinant, but he wanted to make sure that nobody was allowed to say it, that you couldn't object to it, that you couldn't protest it. That's with a phony talking point about, well, if you say that somebody's a racist, that makes someone a racist. Really? And I'm sure that he would agree that if you call somebody a terrorist, that's what makes someone a terrorist, right? Of course not. Charlie Kirk would definitely not agree that saying that black people commit all of this crime, doesn't that just make black people criminals? Because after all, if you're going to call black people criminals, they're just going to look and say, hey, if you're going to call me a criminal, I might as well go ahead and just act like one anyway. I'm sure he would agree with that, right? With the exact same logic? Of course not. Charlie Kirk did not want a society that was colorblind. What he wanted was a society that was ultra-color hypersensitive. But what he wanted was for this ultra-color hypersensitive society to be one where you couldn't say it. You would just have white fiat and there would be nothing you could do about it. That was his definition of colorblind. What it meant was color silent. Silent about the blatant white supremacy and white privilege and white primacy that the society would be based on and would carry out every day. Just don't say anything about it. In fact, you're not allowed to say anything about it. That's what he actually wanted. Not color blindness, but color silence. And that's the reason why prior to his death, Charlie Kirk was one of the main people talking about the death of that Ukrainian woman. He was obsessed with so-called black-on-white crime, which is ridiculous in and of itself.
White individuals are actually more likely to be attacked, especially even per capita, by black individuals in this country. And in fact, if you want to actually talk about race-focused activity, why is it that you then ignore all the race-focused activity of black on white crime? Will, I want to live in a race-neutral country. I don't like talking about race all the time. But when I see it, and I see the left ignore it, and we try to make them live up to their own standard of rules that they force-fed us during the chaos of 2020, it really goes to show the destruction that this can lead to the entire nation.
Black people have neither the time nor the inclination to target anyone. Charlie Kirk had made an entire career out of demonizing black people. He made it a point that he would repeat the phony black crime stats every chance he got, talking about black on white crime, etc., etc. In fact, the very week that he was killed, he had been talking about how black on white crime was just this big threat and that white people were just so in danger because black people were coming to get them. In fact, his very last Twitter tweet on Earth, the very last Twitter tweet that he posted, was about how the killing of that white Ukrainian woman had to be politicized so they could go after all these black people. That was his very last Twitter tweet, the very last one that he ever posted. That's what he chose to do. And because he decided to spend his entire career pushing the lie that black people are the biggest threat to white people's safety and black people are targeting white people, etc., all this phony racial hysteria, I decided that when the news dropped that he had been killed, I pointed out he's been killed by a white person. Why? Because those are the actual stats. Those are the actual numbers. Over 80% of white murder victims are killed by other white people. Virtually all political assassinations in the U.S. are carried out by a white suspect, usually a white male. I can't think of any white women who have carried out political assassinations. And I didn't just do it once, I did it a number of times just to point out I didn't have to wait until there was anything confirmed. I know what the freaking numbers are. I actually know what the statistics are. So because of that knowledge, I didn't have to sit back and wait. The DNC shills and the low IQ bootlicks, those clowns, they were like, well, we don't know. I knew. By the way, on a side note, I couldn't help but notice that a lot of the loudmouths who called themselves attacking me because, well, you said Harvey Weinstein was probably going to beat the rap. Instead, he went to prison. What you got to say now? I noticed that those same people are quiet the other 99.9% of the time. See, I didn't need to wait until a suspect had been named or any photographs were put out there. As soon as I heard he had been killed, I say he's been killed by a white man. And I posted it up there. You can see the timestamps. I didn't have to wait. I already knew. Why? Because I understand the system that I live under. I understand how it operates. Now, Charlie Kirk had some illusions about it, but those illusions have been taken away, as has his life. But Kirk just kept on repeating it anyway, because if you repeat a lie long enough, it becomes the truth, right? Meanwhile, the FBI reported that over 80% of white murder victims are killed by other white people. Charlie Kirk never mentioned this fact even once. None of his supporters did. And now Charlie Kirk has become an addition to that statistic. As I've long said, you don't have to live in the real world, but you can't live anywhere else. And the fact that Charlie Kirk's killing has knocked Irina Zarutska right out of the headlines, the white right's not even talking about her anymore, that shows how patently false and hollow and hypocritical and phony they were being. Their outrage was just the typical phony white right outrage. They were trying to use her death as a political football in some putrid game of power politics. All they wanted to see was how much mileage could they get out of the corpse of this dead white woman. That's all it meant to them and nothing else. And whatever policy that they thought that they were going to use Irina Zarutska's death as a springboard for, well, they can go ahead and forget about that. Charlie Kirk's death, on the other hand, is not politically profitable to them, mainly because of the fact that they can't blame it on a black person. That's what they really wanted. They were hoping that some crazy Negro walked in there and just shot him up, but that's not what happened. It was the usual person who does it, the one who always kills all of these people. That's who's responsible for the death of Charlie Kirk. That's why you had the governor of Utah out there practically on the verge of tears, ready to start boo-hooing and bursting into sobbing and crying. I was praying for 33 hours that it wasn't one of ours. Well, we know what one of ours means. It means a white man. That's what it meant. He was hoping it was somebody who was other than white. I need a sacrificial lamb. We got to get some political momentum going. We're stalling out here. We need to get some political momentum going. Well, if it's not one of ours, and they were ready to jump all over this. See, that's what the white right's been doing. They're trying to flood the zone with misinformation and disinformation, kick up some white noise Say that the person was black. Say that the person was of the left, etc. Anything that would give them the ability to say, all right, we got to go to war and we got to do whatever we want to do now. Now we got the carte blanche to just do anything. We can kill or whatever. That's what they were trying to tiptoe and edge their way towards. But just with everything else that these guys do, that one blew up in their faces. These people are not very bright, and they try to make up for their complete and thorough intellectual inferiority, their low IQs, with high amounts of violence. But in the end, they wind up usually pointing their guns at each other. Violence begets more violence. It certainly doesn't beget progress. So, the big question now that a lot of people have been asking is, what is the long-term impact of Charlie Kirk's death going to be? What long-term impact will this have? You haven't heard me say much about it because there hasn't been anything to say on that front. Donald Trump was hit with a bullet last year, and if that didn't result in any sort of widespread MAGA madness, the killing of Charlie Kirk won't either. Yes, you're going to have some right-wing violence regardless, probably even see an increase in it, but they've already been killing people before now. That's not going to be new. Back in June, you had yet another white shooter from MAGA, this time in Minnesota, and he shot 3 people and their dog. He shot a Democratic state senator, John Hoffman, and then he went on to the home of Minnesota Democratic House Speaker Melissa Hortman. He shot and killed her, then he killed her husband Mark, and even their dog Gilbert. This is what happened just a couple of months ago. Oh, and what did the Orange Man have to say about that? Absolutely nothing. What did Charlie Kirk have to say about that? Absolutely nothing. You had a MAGA maggot who went on to kill 2 people and wound a third, killing them simply because of their political party, and he had a list of like 70 other people that he was going to go after. This guy was going to make a freaking day of it. And as far as they were concerned, politically motivated killings? Oh, never heard of that. Oh, well, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers. Charlie Kirk is killed? Ooh, we need action, not thoughts and prayers. We need legislation. We need policy, not thoughts and prayers. And what is Charlie Kirk's death going to mean for Donald Trump? Well, Trump didn't want to have to deal with the Epstein scandal. And with one of the online white rights favorite trolls having been killed, they're not talking about Epstein anymore, or at least that's what he was hoping. Because there seems to be a groundswell of people who basically, because the killer in this case is not somebody who's from a demographic that would be politically convenient for them, black. Because of that, they're like, oh, well, we don't need to be worrying about the killer here. That's what happened with Nancy Mace. Congresswoman Mace, she was talking about how the left's been killing us and we're going to be fighting back and we're not taking this. And as soon as they found out who the killer was, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers. That's what Charlie Kirk would want, thoughts and prayers. So for the online sphere, you got a lot of people who are saying we're not going to take our eye off the ball. Charlie Kirk's death does not change the fact that we still want the Epstein files. Charlie Kirk was one of their personal avatars. He was a stand-in for their own putrid, cheap, bigoted mentality. So for him to be killed publicly, when he was doing a public appearance to, as usual, attack black people, that's got the white right shook, and they need something to make them feel normal again. Getting back to Epstein, that'll do it. And there have been others still who have been saying that Charlie Kirk had a couple of murmurings about Israel that he had made, whether or not the U.S. needs to be sending them so many weapons and so much money and such. A lot of conspiracy theories going around. Not to say that Israel, if his stance on them had changed, wouldn't want to see him assume room temperature. Benjamin Netanyahu has certainly killed people for less. But it is to say that if Charlie Kirk was starting to get a little bit wobbly on Israel, that would certainly be an interesting thing to bring up. Ben Shapiro certainly wouldn't like it. And mentioning Ben Shapiro brings us to the next subject of this evening's address, and that's the so-called groypers. We're talking about Nick Fuentes, the white Latino, white supremacist little organization. Now, just for the record, Nick Fuentes basically makes his living trying to show how extreme he can be, and he decided that he was going to get into a 3-way fight with both Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk, saying that Ben Shapiro basically is an Israeli puppet, which is true, and saying that Charlie Kirk basically wasn't white supremacist enough, which is false. But Nick Fuentes was making the point that Charlie Kirk wasn't extreme enough. Charlie Kirk was wobbly on too many things. This guy, he wasn't hardcore enough. He was just a pretend white supremacist. I'm the real thing. That's what Nick Fuentes is running around doing with his pals. And this back and forth that Nick Fuentes and his putrid followers would have with the putrid followers of Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro, this little 3-way online fight that they had, they called this the Groyper Wars, apparently. Well, it just goes to show that these guys clearly grew up on a steady diet of pop culture, and these are the best names they could come up with. See, this is what happens when your culture doesn't have real heroes, doesn't have real icons, doesn't have genuine freedom fighters. When all you got are a bunch of slave owners and a bunch of self-interested gangsters and rapists and opportunists, when these are the only people you can point to as having any sort of name recognition among your culture, then what happens is you don't have any real heroes. And when it comes time for a fight, you don't have anyone virtuous that you can appeal to or draw inspiration from. So instead, you're reduced to trying to draw your inspiration from video games and movies and cartoons. You got these fools trying to make themselves out to be some sort of heroes based on Star Wars. Yeah, well, Charlie Kirk ain't no Luke Skywalker. But the significance of Nick Fuentes happens to be that a lot of the talking points that the killer in this case, this Tyler Robinson individual, a lot of his postings and the things that he was writing on the ammunition that he used that was recovered from the scene, a lot of this stuff had video game memes on it, and a lot of it had what people have identified as groyper talk, the kind of language and jargon and verbiage used by followers of Nick Fuentes. That's what a lot of people have been pointing out. A lot of this stuff wasn't just coming out of this guy's head. He was repeating what had happened online. There have been a number of people who said that this guy was basically terminally online, that he lived his life online, and that apparently what he did was supposed to impress a lot of those folks who were online. That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to do something that would impress them in the real world. Nick Fuentes is, of course, denying everything. I don't know why. It's not like the authorities are going to be coming after him. He's not black, so because of that, he doesn't have to worry that anybody's going to be coming to round him up or that they're going to be arresting him or trying to shut him down. Come on, give me a break. They didn't do it with the Oath Keepers or with the Proud Boys or any of those guys until January 6th. That's when they finally came for those guys. And that was because the Democrats were back in control, and because of that, the Orange Man couldn't protect his minions, at least for a few years till he got back into the White House. So Nick Fuentes doesn't really have anything to worry about. I don't know what it is that he thinks that he's preserving by getting out here and vigorously defending all of this. It doesn't matter. Now, for those of you who might have, I don't know what I would call it, more broad ideas when it comes to these kind of instances, as far as conspiracy theories goes, well, it's hard to say. Was this actually some sort of organized hit that was taken out, and not just some disaffected groyper who got his hands on some guns, some half-baked clown who came from a family full of white privilege and decided he wanted to prove something to his online chums? Could there actually be something else at work here? Hard to say. Things like this don't occur because someone wants to make something happen. They occur precisely because the goal is to prevent something from happening. Big, messy things like this inevitably get used as nothing more than a smokescreen for someone to hide behind while they try to forward their own personal agenda. As the old Roman saying goes, cui bono, who benefits from the crime? Charlie Kirk is dead. Who could be in a position to benefit from it no matter how this shakes out, no matter who gets the blame for it? Who would be in a position to do that? But we'll have to wait and see, I suppose. Though if I put on my tinfoil hat, it's enough to make you believe the conspiracy theories. People posting memes that Charlie Kirk asked Ben Shapiro about Gaza, and that might have set something bad in motion for him, as if their young white mouthpieces might decide to go the way of Marjorie Greene. When that happens, someone like Charlie Kirk would be more useful dead than alive. The online sphere will be in a tizzy about this, but the power behind the scenes won't be. Charlie Kirk was an operative for them, nothing more. He wasn't a leader, he was a follower, taking orders and selling the soap. Yes, he had a higher profile than, say, a Richard Spencer, but he wasn't meant to be a leader. He was always meant to be a cheerleader for his donors' point of view. Was this the result of the white powers that be getting rid of someone who was proving defective? We shouldn't rule it out. He was a tool, after all, and as I've always told you, when white supremacy's done with its tools, it breaks them. And that doesn't just go for the black tools. But one of the interesting things that come out of all of this is that you got a lot of folks in the dominant society who are pointing their fingers and other things at one another. And these people are now at each other's throats. I had said that it was going to be a good thing for the Orange Man to get back into the White House precisely because it would lead to these kind of confrontations. Now, Charlie Kirk in specific wasn't necessarily part of my calculus, but it doesn't matter. The growing belligerence of the white right would at some point require the Democrats to do something about it. Or it would make their supporters realize that they can't rely on anyone but themselves. This is how you get movement when you have a system that's decided that's going to dig in their heels and not do anything. You make it where it becomes so painful that people have no choice but to decide that they're going to do something. Now, the DNC shills and the online cowards who are attacking the black media and saying that we were the bad guys for daring to make demands, I want you to look at what's happening right now, family. One of the chief mouthpieces for anti-black racism has been taken out. The white right's own campaign of anti-black demonization got derailed in mid-stride because of that. And as black people, we're able to sit back and observe all of this. All of these people who were previously so comfortable are now catching hell. I didn't vote for Donald Trump, nor did I tell anyone else to. What I did was I pointed out that neither the Democrats nor the Republicans were on black people's side, and that the exact same way that the DNC shills were falsely claiming that there were Democrat policies that could benefit black people potentially, I also pointed out that if you look at it in its totality, some of even the orange man's own policies could actually work to black people's benefit. But just like the Democrats, he wouldn't be doing it for our good. He would just be doing it for his own interests, just like the Democrats. It is absolutely crucial to be honest about whether or not somebody's policies are actually going to benefit you. And you don't try to turn it into some sort of asinine zero-sum game where there's one side over here who are definitely good for you and the other side are definitely not. You can only do that if you've actually done a balanced clinical appraisal of them. See, that's what we in the black media did. We looked at both parties and said, well, neither one of these clowns are for us. Now, if the orange man gets in there, at least on the immigration front and some other things, at least some of these other folks who thought that they have found a comfortable place under white supremacy, they'll be catching hell just like we had. And truth be told, as black folks, there's not a whole lot that they can do to us that they haven't been doing all along. All of this fear-mongering and people quaking in their boots for no reason, especially from black folks, you would think that we were the most privileged and pampered people in the society the way that some folks have been just quaking in their boots. It makes no sense. I saw that there would be certain advantages to having an unabashed racist back in the White House because he would be on his last legs and in a desperate position, and that being the case, he would make all sorts of irrational moves, the kind that would force precisely the kind of fight that we need to happen in order to break the political and social deadlock that's been going on for so long. That has been the chess move here all along. See, with 2020, what happened was you had the powers that be doing the same thing they did back in 2008. This country was on the verge of a revolution in 2008, believe it or not. And then what happened was the political powers that be decided they were going to pretend to confront America's cardinal sin, anti-black racism. So they brought in a tether, a biracial bootlick. And they said, look, this black guy over here, well, he's kind of half black. He's going to be president now, and see, America is atoning for its sin. And don't mind the fact that all of these billionaires and mega millionaires who raped the national economy and ran the country into the ditch, never mind the fact that these guys are going to be given whatever little money the country has left, any liquidity the nation has left, we're going to just hand it over to those guys so that they can continue to have their gold-plated toilet bowls and continue to sniff coke off a hooker's rump, that kind of thing. We're going to make sure that nothing changes for them. None of them's going to get prosecuted, none of them's going to prison. And that's exactly what the country's first tether president did. He made sure that all of those rich white fat cats who had ripped off the international economy, he made sure that none of them went to prison. He made sure that they all got their big bonuses. In fact, they actually made out like fat rats. The country's wealth would be handed over to them. He didn't bail out Main Street, he bailed out Wall Street. That was the reason why they had no problem supporting him. That's what happened in 2008. Now, by the time you get to 2020, you had Donald Trump in office. And as far as the white left was concerned, well, unfortunately, the power was tipping too much in that particular direction. Donald Trump made some moves that made them think, he may not necessarily be as politically stable as we would like. We got to find a way to balance things. And that means he's got to go. So, with some very questionable chicanery at the local level in some key precincts, Donald Trump was voted out of office in 2020. And that's where the uprisings came in, because the entire purpose of the uprisings was actually going to be to break the enforcement arm of white supremacy. But as soon as Joe Biden got in there, first thing he said was, we're going to be diverting COVID money to prop up the thugs in blue. Oh, and we're going to be sending the Solicitor General to the Supreme Court to argue that we need to weaken Miranda protections, especially for civil cases. He did everything that he could to back up the police. How the hell is that any different than Donald Trump siding with the thugs in blue? Answer, it's not. This was not about trying to help black people. This was about preserving the political status quo. It was about hitting the political reset button, because that's what they've always done. This time around, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to do so. See, this is political reality. Growth is painful. Change requires sacrifice. If you actually think that the entrenched powers that be who are living it up while we suffer are going to voluntarily bring about the changes that you need, then you're a fool. Established power has always told the oppressed that they can improve things, but they have to stay within the guidelines and the boundaries created by established power. guidelines and boundaries that are meant to make sure that nothing changes. What the DNC shills don't like is that with white power on the march, they can't lull you to sleep with empty talk about universal health care or women on the Supreme Court. Barack Obama sitting here humming a few bars of Al Green, that's not going to do it. And Kamala Harris talking about vibes, ain't nobody going to hear that. When you're facing an existential threat, you got to come up with some tangibles and some serious policies. And the Democrats are showing that even now they're determined to not do that. This is not political confusion on their part, no matter what a lot of these online chumps may tell you. This is the Democrats formally declaring that their job is to maintain political continuity. Both political parties are revealing themselves to be nothing more than wings on the same vulture. Trying to change things from the top down by voting for candidates who you think are going to do something, that only works when those candidates actually want to change things. None of these guys do. So, how do you break this kind of political gridlock then? You got to shake things up by making people uncomfortable. Now, yes, that takes time and it takes suffering, but when put under hardship, people will eventually get off their butts and do something. When it hurts enough. This is not a fast process, and it's certainly not one that's pleasant, but when all else fails, that's what you're left with. That's a political reality that too many of us simply don't want to accept. All the talk about National Guardsmen in the streets means nothing. They become part of the background scenery after a while. As long as people are still able to go to work, as long as people are still able to enjoy their creature comforts, they're not going to be concerned about troops standing there. After a while, they'll get used to it. People aren't about to fight white supremacy until they see it directly threatening them. And for a lot of people, that scares them. The prospect of having to stand up to white supremacy, they get scared of it. They were certainly scared in 2020, but just like in 2020, when the people decide they've had enough, the thugs in blue can't stop them. And don't let anybody tell you that the Democrats seriously oppose the likes of Charlie Kirk. They did not. He's been out there for at least a decade doing his anti-black routine, and Democrats ain't done a doggone thing about it. Democrats aren't running on a platform to stop any of the policies or the initiatives that the Charlie Kirks of the world have been promoting. They're running to be the tone police. That's what they're about. Well, we have to strike a certain tone and we got to speak a certain way. Trump is so mean with his words, and people need to speak more nicely. That's what Democrats are running on. And yes, Trump and the white right have been saying that they want to use Charlie Kirk's death as a springboard to try to forward some policies to silence their political opponents. Anyone who says anything they don't like, well, here's my question. Why don't the Democrats care about their own power in this case? If you know that the Republicans are targeting you, why don't you vow we're going to be standing up to these guys and let's go ahead and get some hardline policies in place to push back against them? Well, the reason the Democrats aren't doing that is because, as they see it, the main threat isn't Trump or his white right minions. TPUSA and the Groypers, they're not the big threat. The threat to Democrats are younger voters who are making demands, specifically young black voters, because they're making demands that the Democrat donors don't like and are determined to stop because the demands would reduce the donor class's power. That's the actual threat that the Democrats see. That's what they're actually running against. And you can tell because of the policies they put in place and the policies that they don't even mention. People have pointed out what we in the black media have said for decades now, that the people who are outraged about Charlie Kirk's death are not concerned about the children who are shot and killed in America's schools every single year. Donald Trump was the one who personally sat in the Oval Office and announced Kirk was killed. He never did that for any of the school shootings that have happened on his watch. Hell, there was a school shooting the day that Kirk was killed. And he didn't say anything about it, didn't give a word of condolence for the families of any of those young people who were injured. This is the same white right who only hours before Charlie Kirk was killed, they were going into phony hysterics about a white Ukrainian woman having been killed on a train. And yet these same people, they don't care about the kids being killed, white children being killed. It's a valid point, and we've answered it many times. White power doesn't care about its children being killed because survival is not at the top of white power's list of priorities. Staying in power, that's their top priority. Charlie Kirk said it himself. Gun deaths are merely the cost of doing business, and he considered it an acceptable price to pay. The school kids who get killed by mass shooters are not required for white power to stay in control. So these right-wing nuts who are pitching a fit, they don't care about any of those dead kids, dead white children. Charlie Kirk, on the other hand, he was a direct spokesman for their power. So when he's killed, that actually matters. That white woman who's on the train, she was a potentially useful political football because she was killed by the right color person. See, all of these school kids who get killed, they keep being killed by white males. You can't use that. We don't want a policy to be going after them. That's the reason why Nancy Mace on a dime could instantly go from, we're at war with these people, we got to go to war with these people, to we need to pray for these people. That's why she did it, because it was discovered that the wrong color person killed Charlie Kirk. Timothy McVeigh voiced the same sentiment when he was asked about how he could justify blowing up a federal building that had little kids inside. He called his victims mere collateral damage, and his only regret was that the dead children distracted people from the political vengeance that he had wreaked. He was trying to make a political statement, and people were talking about all these dead kids, these pesky dead kids. They were an annoyance because they diluted the message as he saw it. So you see, that's how the minds of the white supremacists works, because Timothy McVeigh, he was also a white supremacist. Unless you're forwarding their power, they don't care who dies or how often, even children. I'm sure that you've noticed that more than a few people have said, we have to learn not to resort to violence if we're going to solve our country's problems. First of all, as Malcolm said, you need to watch out whenever you see a Negro talking that we and our stuff when talking about America. We cannot say we and our. That's foolishness. And second of all, the people who commit the violence, they don't want to solve anything. As they see it, they're going to force the country to stay as it is. Hell, Charlie Kirk said the country needs to go backwards, to be more restrictive and more repressive. So people need to understand that the reason the country can't solve its problems, quote unquote, is because there's a number of people who have become rich and powerful precisely because of those problems. As a certain segment of the population sees it, there's no problem at all, other than the folks who are demanding change. It's not that they don't see how harmful things are. They see exactly what it is, and they're fine with it and always have been. The real issue is we have some people who are simply too empty-headed to realize that there's people who see all of these problems as actually being perfect. Unless you face up to that reality, you'll waste your time trying to make change with people who have no interest in changing anything. And then you run around in rhetorical circles asking, how come we can't make any progress? Because the people you're attempting to ally yourself with, they are the problem. White power is coming under pressure. They're losing their ability to stay unified, and that's an absolute requisite for white power to endure. We see them increasingly at each other's throats. This is what happens when you got a loud, obstreperous orange maggot in the White House who decides that he's going to be spending all of his time offending people. This is exactly what's called for. Now they will, especially the white right, try to maintain their unity by attacking us. That's what they keep doing. That's basically them saying, hey, we need for the dominant society to get on code. But that's not the magic distraction that they need it to be, not much anymore. The white right doesn't care about Charlie Kirk's death. It was all political theater on their part. They were performing for the cameras and trying to get as much mileage out of his death as possible. But now that the killer's been caught, and is predictably a white male, just like practically all the other mass shooters and assassins. In fact, the killer looks just like Charlie Kirk. Skinny, feeble-looking, short conservative hairstyle. Charlie Kirk was basically killed by his own reflection. And because the killer didn't fit the narrative, the air has gone right out of the white right's sails. They were going to exploit the death of Charlie Kirk. They thought they were going to ride that corpse to glory. Trump won't even talk about it now. A reporter asked him about it. The first thing Trump deflected to was, we're building a ballroom on the back of the White House. It's going to be glorious. You would think that he would be all over it. But by outward appearances, Tyler Robinson's family were basically true red MAGA. His parents were Republicans. There's a bunch of pictures of Tyler Robinson from the time that he was a small child. His parents had him at the gun range. So these are bad optics for the white right. That's why they don't know what to do about it. They don't know what to do, so they've decided to do nothing. So for all you people listening to me who were so terrified about what MAGA was going to do after Kirk got killed, did you notice that I wasn't scared of these creeps at all? And now that their phony outrage campaign has blown up in their faces yet again, they're trying to change the subject. Now, I'm not saying that the typical incompetence of the white right is going to be some sort of protection for us. It won't be. But the point that I'm trying to make is these people are not some sort of geniuses. They're not some sort of criminal masterminds. They're not some sort of Machiavellian intellects. These are a bunch of dyed-in-the-wool, low IQ white supremacists who trip over their own freaking shoelaces. The reason that these people are in charge is precisely because of the fact that they use overwhelming violence and they got us outnumbered. But their numbers don't count for so much if we are organized. That has always been the guiding message of the black media. That's why I've said for 17 plus years, I'm far more interested in what we're doing than in what the enemy is doing. But Donald Trump, he gonna become president. This is bad for us. Bad in which way? How is it going to be bad in a way that it wouldn't be bad under the Democrats? Black folks who are trying to con themselves into believing that we got friends when we really don't. And sure, you can bet that there's going to be some sort of half-brained rearguard action to try to see if there's any possible chance that they can milk some sort of political value out of Charlie Kirk's corpse. But that's not going to go anywhere at all. You see, his killing had all of this meaning just a couple of days ago. They were so obsessed with it, but now... Well, now Charlie Kirk has become like the deaths of all of those white school kids who also died in school shootings. Not worthy of too much comment, because it doesn't serve their power. Kirk's death would have served them had it been at the hands of a black person, but it wasn't because the white rights enemies are not gun-toting psychos like they are. And that's what eats them alive. This proves to everybody exactly who and what the real threat is. Think of all the Black Lives Matter rallies. There was no violence at any of them. Nobody was shooting people who were speaking at the crowd. No people having to scatter, except when some racist white gunmen showed up. Kyle Rittenhouse broke the law, illegally carried an assault rifle so that he could kill some BLM protesters. Daniel Perry in Texas intentionally went out of his way to find a BLM protest, then deliberately drove his truck into the protest and murdered a white man there, falsely claiming that he had been threatened. And in Minneapolis, you had some 4chan white racists who planned a mass shooting online, posted videos bragging about what they were planning to do, and then when they went to a Black Lives Matter rally, they began shooting people. Those guys were caught and sent to prison. And this violence isn't even limited to BLM protests. Even MAGA isn't safe from MAGA mass shooters. Donald Trump was shot at a rally last year by a white man, and now Charlie Kirk has been killed at one of his rallies by a white man from a Republican family. And as I mentioned earlier, that wasn't even the only school shooting that took place that day, because on the same day that Charlie Kirk discovered that 80% of white murder victims are killed by another white person, over in Colorado, the same state that brought you Columbine, there was also another high school shooting. A 16-year-old named Desmond Holley went to a high school and shot 2 students, leaving them critically injured, and then he killed himself. And no one will be surprised to learn that just like with Dylan Roof, just like with Nicholas Cruz, just like virtually every mass shooter out there, this mass shooter in Colorado was also online most of the time. His TikTok accounts contain white supremacist symbols. And just to show that these creeps are never alone, one of the posts on the shooter's TikTok account came from a user who was encouraging this psycho to go be a hero, which of course is white supremacist jargon for go out and commit some act of violence. Now, whenever the shooter is black, we see the white authorities immediately saying we gotta round them all up. All-in laws get invoked. The first arrest is only the beginning. This is just the start of the investigation. But of course, when the shooter is white, they say the opposite. Well, he's a lone wolf. They say the words lone wolf before they even tell you his name. Hell, this has been going on since at least the days of Lee Harvey Oswald. Before they even told the country who Lee Harvey Oswald was, they were already saying, well, we're sure that he acted alone. See, that's a racialized narrative, and it's as predictable as the tide. I've said it for 17 plus years and will continue to say it. America doesn't have a gun problem. It has a white privilege problem. But the biggest problem on that front is who makes the laws and who's supposed to be enforcing them. Too many of the lawmakers and the police are like Charlie Kirk, and like Tyler Robinson, and Daniel Perry, and Kyle Rittenhouse, and Dylan Roof. That's the reason why neither the laws nor those in law enforcement ever seem able to do anything about these people before they strike. There have been people who have been fired for their jobs or otherwise canceled for allegedly what the white right calls celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. Now, Kirk himself routinely celebrated the violent attacks on people he didn't like, and he gleefully defended the murders of black people. He did it shamelessly. And since he was a free speech absolutist, would he approve of people being fired or canceled for exercising their God-given right to free speech when he dedicated his life to fighting for absolute free speech, right? Even if it offended his supporters, would he say, you can't say what you want if it offends my supporters? Is that what he would say? Actually, he would say that. He would say, you know what? You can't say something if I don't like it. Charlie Kirk was a two-faced hypocrite and a liar. He told people that the reason racists like himself were racist was because people accused him of being racist. Sure, his behavior had nothing to do with it. You know, you get accused of racism after you say or do something racist, not before. But then again, logic has never been the white right's strong suit. Charlie Kirk certainly never got tired of repeating the white right's talking points about so-called black-on-white crimes. He couldn't wait to be the first one to politicize the killing of that Ukrainian woman. And yet, if you ask Charlie Kirk, hey, do you think that all of your phony black-on-white crime memes are the cause of these people getting killed by black criminals? If you ask him about that and say, hey, if you're going to keep accusing black people of attacking white people, then heck, they might as well do it because you're going to accuse them of it anyway, so it's your fault for saying it, right? Do you think he would agree with that? And the same thing goes for terrorism by Muslims. Would Charlie Kirk and his ilk agree that accusing Muslims of terrorism is what causes radical Muslim terrorists in the first place? Of course not. If they wanted to be consistent, they would, but we know it's not about consistency. It's about a pathetic lie meant to only be used to give cover to white supremacists. And when you apply it to anyone else, they immediately disagree. Taking personal responsibility, that's never been the white right's strong suit either. So as far as my thoughts regarding the killing of Charlie Kirk, that pretty much covers most of the major stuff, though I would add one last observation. There's been a number of individuals who have called themselves trying to give tributes to Charlie Kirk, including a number of well-known sports teams. Now, Charlie Kirk was not some middle-of-the-road activist. He was not some sort of socially conscientious spokesperson for this or that cause. This guy was a hardcore anti-black racist. He made it a point that he would laugh at and joke about the killings and attempted killings of people. This was an individual who said that empathy was no good and Dr. King was a bad guy. That's who and what Charlie Kirk was. And yet you got individuals who are holding him up and showing what they've always believed. This is the kind of guy who they like what he said. And that's the reason why they're celebrating him and praising him. And so we want to give tributes to this guy. Yeah, precisely because he's the guy who says all the dirty, grimy stuff that they feel like they can't say. Well, anyone who's decided that they think that they've got cover now to show we love this Charlie Kirk guy and we love all that stuff that he was saying, we're going to be keeping in mind who these people are, because they're going to be calling themselves trying to slither away from it later on and claiming, well, we don't know who it was who put up these billboards, and we don't know who it was who decided during the middle of a Yankees game they're going to have a Charlie Kirk memorial. We don't really know who it was. It was somebody. No, we're not going to allow that. You see, over here in the B1, we judge people by the company they keep. See, black people are going to have to grow up and be realistic and open their eyes. When it comes to the white left and the right, in too many cases, the similarities far outweigh the differences. And when it comes to black people, for a lot of these people on the white left, there is no difference between them and the white right. A lot of these people on the white left have no problem whatsoever making a lane or trying to run interference for some white racist on the right who says some stuff against black people or advocates for the killing of black people and tells us, well, you know, words are not the same as actions, mind you. And then as soon as black people say something, oh my God, we got to denounce you. What the hell's wrong with you? You people, you need to be better than this, etc., etc. That's the thing that we got to recognize. There's a lot of these folks who call themselves leftists. They're left on a lot of issues except for black people. They are liberal except where black people are concerned. They are all open-minded except where black people are concerned. We got to be realistic about that. There's a hell of a lot of them who disagree with Charlie Kirk on social issues that are relevant and specific to themselves. But where black people are concerned, they completely and thoroughly agree with them. And we're talking about people who would be on these college campuses and such. You'd be surprised how many of these so-called liberal professors, self-professed liberal professors, who are actually just the biggest Charlie Kirk fans, or at least they're fans of anybody who has something negative to say about black people. As far as they're concerned, that's the kind of line that needs to be crossed, and more people need to be crossing it. So you keep an eye open for these people who call themselves trying to do tributes for Charlie Kirk or run interference for him. Keep in mind who these people are. Because later on, when they call themselves trying to slither away from what they've said, just like with Charlie Kirk, we're going to present them with the receipts. And just like with Charlie Kirk, hiding their heads in the sand won't be an option either. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Hildman Gallo, Sabrina Scott, Good Citizen, Ronald Waits, and Stephen 12. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.